Okay, it seems that we are on live on Contrast's YouTube channel. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to international audiences. I'm Nadine, the Asia Alliance Against Torture Secretariat, and I wish to thank colleagues who are spending their time at this moment to observe today's webinar with the theme of Stuck in a Rut, Zero Accountability for Victims of State Violence in Asia Pacific. And today's webinar is actually a commemoration to the International Day in support of victims of torture, as it has been entitled by international entities such as the UN to the freedom from torture is our right. Now, torture itself, as we know, is a horrific practice which violates fundamental human rights. And this inflicts immense physical and also psychological suffering, and it has no place in a just and civilized society. Unfortunately, the act of torture still prevails, and it remains a reality in many countries across Asia Pacific region. Name it Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, so on and so forth. And despite international prohibitions, such as the UN Convention Against Torture, which have been ratified by numerous countries, reports of torture by state actors, including also state security apparatus or forces, still persist. And what's even more troubling is the absence of accountability, where victims of torture often find it difficult, if not impossible, to seek justice against the very institutions that are supposed to protect them. Now, this webinar today, ladies and gentlemen, will dwell deeper into these issues. We will hear and also we will monitor, comprehend our speakers, our experts, about the prevalence of torture in the Asia Pacific, challenges of achieving accountability, and also its potential solutions to move forward in this region. And thus, I would like to welcome three speakers today, including Azra Nasron, the program manager for Suara Rakyat Malaysia, Suaram, who will brief us on the current situation in Malaysia through the recent torture cases, issues, and etc., the state's absence to the ratification on the Convention Against Torture, CAT, as well as a possible forecast to preview torture issues which can be referred to current positive or negative, including and inflicting policies, as well as international encouragement such as UN, ASEAN, and so on. And next, we will have Roberto Privirni, the advocacy officer from International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims, IRCT, who will give the international organization's perspective and monitoring results to recent and recurrent torture issue in Asia Pacific to remind us all to open our eyes that the rights of victims of torture, including the rehabilitation mechanisms and its implementations in Asia Pacific. And last, also the international support. What are the possible opportunities and etc. to the rehabilitation of victims of torture and to also measure states' accountability. And last to speak, we have Makin Omar, the chairperson for Progressive Voice, as she will elaborate to us on current torture issues in Myanmar, including security officers' brutality in private and public realm, as we know from military junta, as well as the bystander and torture mindmaster stance from the military junta themselves. And junta's non-compliance to accountability and justice, as well as possible international solidarities that we can offer furthermore. And maybe without further ado, let us welcome our very first speaker to the webinar, Azura from Swaram. Azura, the floor is yours, and let me present your PowerPoint shortly. Mhm. Let me present. Okay. Yes, Azura, the floor is yours.
Okay. All right. So hi everyone. Thank you so much, Nadine, for the lovely background and for having me from Swaram for the session today. I think it's such a privilege to be talking tonight to do some sharings on the informations of torture issues in Malaysia, and of course with the expert speakers that we have here, which I think will be much more experienced than I am, who is currently not so new in this field, but I would say not so much experts as um, other countries. All right. So uh, when we talk about International Days in support of victims of torture, I think we must always go back to the definition of torture itself. And as the first speaker myself, I would like to actually read the definition again, so that maybe if we have any listeners out here who haven't even heard of this International Day and who doesn't really understand what does torture means and who are the perpetrators. So it's good that I put it so that you can see clearly the things that we are discussing for the session today, right? Next slide. So when we define what is torture itself, right? I think I believe that we have to look at the definition that is given by the United Nations, which is very what we call it. It's very sharp, and everything is in it. It's very clear that that any country, any national laws can actually use this definition as their main definition, right? Yeah. So it says that in the Conventions Against Torture, the definition of torture itself is anything that inflict pain or suffering in the purpose to obtain informations, and when you have punishments and intimidations. And when we look at this definition itself, what we're looking at is at um, the people in the government itself, is the public servants. So sometimes when we talk torture to the people, right, they will always see, oh, how about the torture in the family members, torture in in work. uh, is it not fair that why do you want a certain bill for only a certain sectors of group of people but not another group of people? But this is the part where sometimes people don't understand that when we look at people who have power and how they use the power to actually obtain something, and they can actually um, undermine other people, that is the part where it usually being abused itself. So that is why when we talk about UNCAT, we talk about torture issues among people who have power itself, right? um, among the public servants especially, right? And of course, the effects of torture itself, I think I don't have to mention here very deeply, but uh, through all the cases that we have received, there are no torture cases that actually bring out good information, good things. And most of it will just bring physical and psychological harm that most of people don't see it, because it's deep inside the person itself, especially if it's a psychological. And then it's also, of course, violation of dignity, erosion of rule of law, and it impacts the social and economic consequences, and also impact on the society, because most of the torture things that happen, um, it happens between the people in the lower class sections of the people, right? It's very hard for you to see the elites getting tortured, and it's always the people who cannot afford lawyers, who cannot afford uh, for support, and don't know where to find help, don't know where to get informations. And these are the group of people who will, when you detain someone and you torture them, it will affect their family members, their social circle. And that is why it doesn't just affect on an individual, but it affects the whole circle, as it is, right? Next slide, please. Yeah. So when you look at the cases in Malaysia, right? There are two main cases that I think I want to stress up here. Is first, we call it as chain remand. So a chain remand is when someone is arrested by a police for a new or similar offense because the magistrate court doesn't approve the extension of their remand process. So in the process of someone being detained, the person has to be brought to the magistrate. So the magistrate is the one who's going to give the remand days to the police. So usually if the police wants to continue the remand process, they have to apply it again at the magistrates. But if the magistrate thinks that they cannot see any proofs or any details on why you want to extend the remand, they will say no to it. So what the police will do is they will take you out from that case. They will file another case just to get another remand process. And each of this is where the torture happens, where you will have to confess, you have to sign a lot of papers, you will be locked, you will not be given food, and some don't even get lawyers and things like that. And the best part is that this thing is actually legal in Malaysia because it goes through the process. And that is why whenever we say about this, some of the lawyers even say that, oh, it doesn't against the rule, right? The police are doing just what they want to do. But if ethically, right, if the magistrate says no, it means that you don't have any proofs, right? So why are we letting this go, right? Yeah. Okay, next. And because of this chain remand itself, there are a lot of death in custody issues in Malaysia. And can you go next? I'll just explain this, yeah, because I know it takes so much time. And the problem with all these torture and death in custody cases is that because we don't have any freedom of information and we have a very lack of data, we have lack of information of people who actually died in custody because of torture. And most of the cases that died in the custody, they will say that they have like failure of heart disease or things like that. But some of the cases, they have heart failure because they were tortured, right? So all these things actually comes up in a full circle of problem, right? You do torture and then there's a death in custody and then you don't get the data and then the data is not incorrect. So this is why torture is very rampant itself. Yeah, next. Okay, so there is one case that I would like to share with all of you. This is actually a very old case in Malaysia. It happens in 2017. But the reason why I raised up today is because finally, in 2024, after 7 years of this case happened, High Court ordered the damages that they had to pay to the family, which proven that there's torture in custody itself, right? He was only detained for 2 days. Imagine, for 2 days, right? Like for 2 days, we can't do that much of things, right? But the police can actually detain someone and someone died in the police station. And the reason why it becomes a very viral case is because when he was brought up to the court, the judge already told the police to send him to the hospital because the judge can see him like full of blood and maybe there's a torture. But what did the police do? They decide not to send him to the hospital. They decide to bring him back to the police station and to continue his remand process with the condition that is already there and um, with the court instruction in themselves, right? Because of this, there was a whole list, a very thick report uh, bring out by the investigation commissions at that time, saying on they did investigation on the list of police that were suspected to be part of this death. And believe me, if you read this, only in 2 days, there were more than 46 people were interviewed that were part of this situation. There were a lot of police. This police is the one who brings to the magistrates. This police is the one who beat him up. This police is the one, because there were so many people that in part of it that you really don't know that is it their police are trying to make it very confusing because they are trying to push that this is not my mistakes, right? But this just show on how very inefficient and very chaotic the situation in a police lockup situation itself. And the person actually died in a police lockup that is not registered under the police station. Imagine in Malaysia, the police can actually just detain someone anywhere and they can just put him there and beat him up, right? Right, next. Okay, next. This is just a video of the report itself, but it's okay. So this is actually a research that is being done by the EU and being shared by our National Human Rights Institution, which is Suhakam himself. They actually do some research on why Malaysia actually it's hard for them to ratify CAT, although that it has always been said again and again in the UPR sessions that UN CAT is the lowest hanging fruit. So when the research was done, there are four things that they shared. First is that the incompatibility with existing laws and policies. Of course, we all know that once you ratify UNCAT, you have to actually align your national laws and everything according to UNCAT. And in Malaysia, we have two civil and Sharia laws. And both in civil and Sharia, there is caning, and also in corporal punishment, there's also caning. And maybe in civil, we can actually fight to actually change caning to something else. But in Sharia laws, because it's connected to Islam in some ways, although there are a lot of Islamic countries which already says okay to this, but Malaysia are still in the mind that we cannot change Sharia because this is what Islam says. So they don't want to change this and they still wants to go on with the caning, right? And the second would be gaps in national laws and policy. Because of this, in our penal code, there are no any definition on what is torture itself. So once we do this, we have to actually define what is torture. So one of the things that Swaram is doing right now, we are trying to push for anti-torture bill so that we can really define what is torture. And if we look what is torture in Thailand bill or Philippine bill, we can see very clearly they even stated what is the types of torture that can be seen, right? So these are the things that I think Malaysia is scared, how do you define torture themselves? Because if you look at the cases that I said just now, right? If you put someone in a lockup that is not registered, that is already considered a mental torture, right? How can you put someone like that, right? Yeah. So the third one is that concerns about the commitment to treaty obligations. Of course, I think Malaysia knows that once you sign it, you have to send reports. They have to start to do all the national laws. They had to start to change the systemic problems that we have in Malaysia. They have to put a lot of budget to change the system, the lockup session, the cameras, the trainings of the police themselves. I believe that there will be a lot of budget in this, and I think probably Malaysia thinks that it's not ready to do this at the moment. And the fourth is again to the Sharia law itself. Sharia laws in Malaysia is not under the federal state. It actually depends on each state in Malaysia, right? So even if we decide to ratify UNCAT, federal state says that we want to change, but it's actually up to Sharia if they say yes or no. So in all of this, I think one of the things that our National Human Rights Institution is doing is that they have been meeting with few Islamic leaders from each state to actually convince and to have conversations with them. And actually, some of the Islamic leaders actually agree with having UNCAT because that's what Islam's supposed to be, right? We should be providing peace and are not torturing anyone. But it is still a challenge to actually to make the bureaucrats under them to understand, the people to understand, because I believe that the other commitment that they have to do is actually to how to explain this to the people, right? Yeah, because one of the things in Malaysia also, whenever you want to do some new changes in Sharia laws, they always think that this is because of the liberal and um, you know this is something that is fighting about Islam's norms and things like that, right? So I think we also even have to talk to actually Indonesia, because Indonesia actually done this, right? And we even call experts from Indonesia to talk about this previously. So yeah, okay, next. All right, so moving forward in Malaysia, right? There's three things that I just want to stress on in terms of national. We just um, have this independent and police conduct commission, but of course, this is not something that we ask for. This IPCC actually have lesser responsibilities to compare with our previous commissioners to conduct investigations. But this is something that is new, and we are trying to work with them also, because we believe that we can work together because it's very new, right? So we'll see how it improves themselves. And we also have USGKT, the Criminal Investigation Unit on Death in Custody. So the police actually make commitments that every time there's death in custody, they will post it online. They will tell the informations without waiting for the parliament, so that we all of us can actually look at the documentations and call the families, things like that. And of course, because of the UPR coming up, and the UPR adoption is going to be next week for Malaysia, I hope that the Malaysian government will say something about identifying UNCAT and see how the new government is going to look on this. Because the EU report just now is from the previous government, right? So let's see how Malaysia is after this. Yeah. Okay, I think that's all for me. I hope I make a good sharing session, and looking forward for other speakers later. Yeah.
Mind blowing and speechless, actually. Thank you very much, Azura, for your presentation and noting several things. First, where do I even start? Public officials, instead of focusing on current torture cases which they have resulted from themselves, they would just categorize other terms of torture, ill treatment, mistreatments to civilians. And they do not even have such initiative, for example, they miss a point of how victims of torture are usually those who do not have access to lawyer, and what this acts of torture will impact not only to victims but also to family victims. Because you mentioned earlier, for example, that one of the acts of torture which are normalized in Malaysia is the chain remand, which is legal. And this would lead to the undeniable number cases of extrajudicial killing, not extrajudicial killing, but death in custody, and how this is still pretty much normalized by even judicial bodies. You even mentioned one of the cases, they are very much silent. I meant the judges from these judicial bodies, as they won't even bat an eye on a victim of torture, as they were beaten up by security officers, as they were also brought up to a trial from detention center. They were severely beaten up, but instead of bringing them to the hospital and maybe have those kind of judicial mechanisms to be continued later on, they would just continue on recommending him. That's completely sad, and I hate to see this keep being recurring in Malaysia. Yes, Azura.
Yeah. Sorry. I mean, the court actually asked them to send him to the hospital,
Oh my God, that's
but it's
even
the
worse.
police. Yeah, that's even worse, right? Yeah, the
That's
police
even
didn't
worse.
want to listen. They bring him back to continue the remand process. Yeah. Yeah, that's
That's
even
even
worse.
worse.
True, true. It means
That's
they are
even
not
worse.
scared of the court. They are not scared of the judges and stuff, right? Yeah.
Okay, and I'm looking forward. I actually have a couple of questions. For example, you mentioned the anti-torture law and how it is quite maybe progressing and such. And I'm also curious about the upcoming UPR review in Malaysia. May I ask the date and month for this, Azura, if possible?
The adoption is going to be next week, around 4th and 5th July.
Oh wow, so close. Okay, we have to closely monitor that. So international audiences who are viewing this webinar, I might also want to infer one of the videos on how we can perceive and comprehend more torture in detention in Malaysia. You can access through YouTube, entitled Chili Powder and Thinner. It will give you a whole lot of more explanation to what Azura elaborated earlier. But I would love to ask more questions on that, but we have to get back to our next speaker. First of all, Azura. So thank you again for your presentation. We'll get back to you later on. Next to speak, we have Roberto from IRCT. Roberto, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nadine, for the invite, and thank you very much, Azura, for the presentation. So I'm Roberto. I'm an advocacy officer at the International Council for Torture Victims. And for my presentation, I would like to focus on something that it's crucial for the international IRCT work with the torture victims, with the survivors of torture. The IRCT is an international network of medical centers all over the world which adopt an health-based approach to the rehabilitation of the survivors of torture. We can move to the next one, Nadine. So we can skip to this is simply my outline. So these are the other one, please. Okay, this is what the IRCT does jointly with our member centers all over the world. So the IRCT has two pillars and they are implemented together. But as we might easily understand, when we approach the legal aspect of rehabilitation and reparation for the victims, it takes longer, and the victims have immediate needs that need to be addressed, like physical and psychological rehabilitation, having access to better livelihoods, and having them reintegrated in the social fabric of the country in which the event occurred. At the very same time, under the justice pillar, what we are doing is trying to expose torture and increase accountability for perpetrators, adopting every single time a victim-centered approach, because having the possibility to expose torture, giving the possibility to torture victims to speak out about their experience is part of a psychological rehabilitation process, is increasing accountability for the state and for the perpetrators, but it's crucial also for the rehabilitation of the victims. As a second and third layer of work that we are doing under the pillar of justice, we are conducting advocacy at national, regional, and international level. And we are also supporting our members and other stakeholders with ad hoc trainings on documentation of torture and on rehabilitation of torture survivors and their victims. We can move to the next one. So the right to rehabilitation is crucial in our daily work with the torture survivors, and it includes not only medical and psychological services, but also legal ones. And it puts the victims at the very center of our daily work and this takes into account what the victims need, what the family of the victims need, and also the cultural, social, political background of where of a country and the environment where the events occurred. So it's under international law. It's a right for the victim to have access to this right, and the states have an obligation to grant access to the victim to this right. the state, following this at IRCT, we have developed what it is called the global standards on rehabilitation for torture victims. We can move to the next one, Nadine. So these are the obligations of the states according to the Article 14 of the CAT. So the states has to adopt a long-term approach to the treatment of the survivor, and it has to make it accessible to the victim independently of the process of a judicial remedy. The victims, so this means that also the state, as the first and foremost obligation from the state, is to provide rehabilitation services, psychological and physical rehabilitation services to the survivor of torture. And the victims has the right to choose the rehabilitation service provider and to have access and to be supported by the state in their choice. And as I told already, this access must be immediate, because there are immediate need is it's a bit like adopting a humanitarian approach when it comes to this point. So providing the basic needs to the victims in order to start as soon as possible the reintegration, the healing process of the victim, and the reintegration of the victim into the fabric of the society. Next one, please. So following this one, this consideration, that the IRCT adopted in 2020 the global standards on rehabilitation, putting the victims at the center of the rehabilitation process. And here the IRCT choose to not use the word victim into the global standards on rehabilitation, and to not choose the word victim when we are working with person who have suffered from torture, because we do want the person who has been affected by torture to play an active role and to feel still part of the society. So this helps the person to start the healing process and not having this passive role as a victim who has suffered from torture, and to take out the objectification of to which the person has been through while suffering from torture from the state person. The global standards of rehabilitation for torture survivors are composed by 70 standards, including accountability and independency of the services, non-discrimination, safety of the clients, support to the family of the survivors, access to justice. And also there is an important point that we normally forgot about it, because we are so involved and we are so keen in our struggle. There is also a standard on the care for caregivers, so care to personnel working directly with survivors of victims in order to ensure their physical and psychological health and allow them to work in the best possible way in order to ensure the best possible services to the victim. We can move to the next one. So the IRCT has also developed several indicators in order to assess the services provided by the state to the survivors of torture. So the existence, first and foremost, of the existence of a legal framework in order to grant access to survivors to rehabilitation services is it's crucial for our work, and it's crucial because it's the legal right to reparation and rehabilitation for the torture victims. And then we move forward, checking how much money has been granted to these rehabilitation services provided by the state and allocated to the rehabilitation services, and whether it is sufficient for undertaking the rehabilitation process. We also explore how whether the services are appropriate, whether they are accessible, and whether they have a direct impact on the well-being of the survivors and their family. Because when we take into account this process, we have to take into consideration that the rehabilitation of a survivor and the rehabilitation of a family members of the survivor is a holistic approach, taking into account both all the aspects ranging from the legal perspective, the medical perspective, the psychological perspective. Yeah. Next one. So this is what I'm working on. This is my specific portfolio within the IRCT. So increasing accountability for the state actors for the perpetrators, and how we do it is through the guidance of the Istanbul Protocol. The Istanbul Protocol, the manual on documenting and investigating torture. What we do, why we do it? Because we do it because our aim is to expand the understanding of accountability, because for the victims, for instance, accountability, even though the case won't end up in front of a criminal court exposing the torture, naming the perpetrator, and talking to professional doctors, psychologists, and lawyers of what they experience, is contributing to the rehabilitation process, but it also has an important leverage at the political and legal level to push for reform within the states in order to denounce the systematic and systemic abuse by state agency against the plain citizens. We can move to the next one, is the last one. So if any one of you is interested, we can discuss further later. VRCT has built up a unique course of the global standards of rehabilitation, and there are also resources, because IRCT work in Asia at the moment is really focused on protests and violence against protesters, and we can discuss about it later on. There is also a link to our protest documentation work that we are currently doing. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Roberto, for your presentation. Then I might just conclude to one image that I may portray IRCT as a safe haven for victims of torture, since they are able to speak up, and IRCT is there to document on how this torture could lead to a certain pattern and how this would be some sort of a mechanism to prevent other similar patterns of torture. I might also want to have several questions on the presentation you just elaborated, but I'll save that for later, Roberto, because last but not least, we have Maomar here, who would present current situation in Myanmar by the military junta, and what can we possibly do as an international entity to support and give solidarity in a routine scale of time. Maomar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadine. Thanks to my fellow speakers, also hearing of your respective areas of work and also the country situation in Malaysia. And I think it's really a good time that we come together. So thanks for also organizing this and having me. In case of Myanmar, over the past 3.5 years since the Myanmar military's illegal coup attempt, the torture has become really pervasive in Myanmar. Cases of extreme torture has increased across the country. The very reason is because this military they actually waged an all-out war against the people of Myanmar because people actually rejected their illegal coup attempt. The activists detained during the interrogation. So just to give you one example of the extreme torture, for example, those young activists who were found after they are arrested and during the interrogation, if they were found to have tattoos of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, is the of the country who won the election, or who actually have the tattoo about their revolution, called as Spring Revolution, then these interrogators, they actually use the iron rod or cigarette burning to peel off the skin of those tattoos. Yeah. So just to give you one example. Well, believe it or not, Myanmar's penal framework from 1861 penal code, that is under the British colonial rule, even that penal code from 1861 stipulate the prohibited torture. But then this military in Myanmar, throughout their successive regimes era since 1962, they have continually used torture and ill treatment in prisons, police stations, military bases, and also other places in detention against anyone who actually are against their military rule or their power. So since 1962, so you can imagine how long it has been. And these perpetrators never held to account, ever. The form of torture, from both psychological harm and also the physical harm, and that led to the cases of death and also disability and trauma. Women are at particular risk of sexual harassment and sexual torture. Also, I mean, you will remember in 2017, during the genocide against the Rohingya people were subjected to massacres, mass murders, mass rapes, arbitrary killings, and these. And also, this is not the only places. That was like about already almost 7 years now. But also there are other ethnic minorities regions, in Kachin, in Shan, you see that pattern of this terror and also the extrajudicial killings like that. So the Myanmar military, who has been the main perpetrator of all of these different crimes in Myanmar, have been immune. Yeah, they've been enjoying the impunity for so long that international justice, well, first, Myanmar justice system always protected them. They always use the legal and weaponize these legal and judicial system for their benefit. But then if you think of the genocide against the Rohingya, that's been 7 years, the international justice mechanisms continue to fail until now, as we speak. Myanmar is not a signatory, or Myanmar has not ratified the Convention Against Torture, which is really sad. We actually thought that during the time of the country opening, when the Daw Aung San Suu Kyi government came into power, civil society advocated for, but it didn't happen. Then there was this Myanmar National Human Rights Commission. Since its inception in 2011, that mechanism, that institution was only to provide the protection to the military, but not to the victims or survivors. So this zero accountability victims and victim families has non-stop forever, and access to justice has never been possible. And that's really something that, like in the region, Myanmar has this to the extreme of how the torture in different forms are actually taken place, and yet there has never been any judicial system that can actually handle this. So just to give you the quickly picture of where Myanmar is right now, by this month, the Myanmar military already killed more than 5,300. That includes 673 children and 1,028 women. They have arrested almost 27,000 more than 20,000 are still in detention. The torture victims particularly include the activists who oppose this military. And also that includes the human rights defenders, civilians, and also their family members. If the activists are not found at their home, then their family members are targeted. And the perpetrators are, of course, the military, but also the police. You see that different, including the military's armed militias. And you see that in the interrogation center, but also in the prison and also in the police custody and like that. So usually they use all kind of methods to extract the information or to force these detainees to confess. Yeah. So I think that's been very challenging for the Myanmar civil society and human rights defenders. So many of them either end up in jail or being killed or forced to flee the country. So there are cases of so many cases like that are happening. The women and LGBTIQ community are mostly subjected to the gender-based violence and sexual torture. And there are many extreme cases that I don't even I don't even want to actually share with you, but it's just their sexual organs being burned with a cigarette, or there's so many of these things. And sometimes the young women were sexually abused and raped in front of for example, their boyfriends, who happen to be also activists. So there are many cases like that are also there. I think one thing that I want to actually bring up here is that if you go beyond the interrogation centers and prisons and police custodies, police stations, there are many areas where the resistance against the military is very strong, where the military by troops will enter, where they will burn down the villages, where they will actually torture and kill the people and rape the women. So there are many of these cases are happening in central and upper Myanmar, as well as in some of the ethnic areas, such as in Rakhine and Chin in the west. So we see that, when it comes into the area where the fightings are happening, that's where the military will target the civilians, because they see that, it is a way for them, using torture as a weapon of war to retaliate the resistance. Yeah. So you see that so much, and there are many massacres happening, even from January to April this year. In 4 months, 36 massacres. And even just last month in May, on 29th of May, there was a massacre of the Rakhine villagers. 76 men were tortured and shot with the guns, and also stabbed with the knives in front of their family members at Byaimbu village in Rakhine State. The women and children were abducted and taken to wherever, and then deprived of water and food, but also the women were raped. So there are so many of these survivors and victims and witnesses accounts are coming out a lot. Yeah. But at the same time, you have, in Myanmar, there is one particular community, which are the Rohingya, who are the genocide survivors from 2017 military's genocide. Yeah. But now in Rakhine State in the west, this particular community, who has the most vulnerability threshold, or the most acute vulnerability, they are caught, and they've been facing the abduction, arrest, torture, and forced disappearance. Their villages being burned down. They are being forced out of their homes by Myanmar military, as well as the Arakan army, with the ethnic Rakhine army. So we have the situation in Myanmar where these extreme level of the crimes and atrocities crimes are happening. But then let's go to where things are, from how the response from the international community or from the ASEAN. We are not seeing Until now, after 3.5 years, we are not seeing, in spite of this level of violence in Myanmar by the Myanmar military, we are not seeing the ASEAN or the United Nations, particularly the Security Council, whose mandate is for peace and security and the protection of the civilians, on anything, any concrete to stop this military's atrocities. Well, friends, this is where Myanmar is right now. I don't want to call it a forgotten crisis because people should not be forgetting about Myanmar's crisis, because it's not only Myanmar crisis internally where people had to flee across the border to Thailand or India, but also the impact on the ASEAN regional peace and stability is already increased. So what we really need is, we need your support, we need your help, we need your solidarity for the humanitarian crisis that to deal with people to people, that we need your support, but also the most importantly, we need you to actually raise your respective governments and to the UN and to the ASEAN. They just cannot continue with the apathy and not doing anything. So I think I'll just stop here, Nadine. Thank you so much for having me.
We are actually thankful for having you here, Ma Omar. Thank you very much for your presentation. And when people try to refer the violence in Myanmar, they would usually prefer it back to the 2021 failed coup. However, we might glance back again to what you mentioned before, since 1862, if I'm mistaken, Ma Omar. 1862, there has
1861, yeah.
1861, 1862, that there has been this formed of violence which is nurtured up until this point, where maybe we can also infer to the breaking point of 2021 as it gets worse since then, because we can then see our friends in Rohingya, they're still suffering up until this point as they try to flee from their country, but they still try, whenever they try to preserve their livelihood, they still experience this amount of torture even outside their own home. So I also want to highlight that both ASEAN and also the UN Security Council have been very silent, and there hasn't been any sorts of direct impact on what has been happening at the moment, although they have been trying to upscale or trying to remind the international entities about this atrocity in Myanmar. However, we can see at the moment it's not going well, as it is not impacting on how this immune system from military junta would stop at any point. However, Ma Omar, we're still in pretty much solidarity with you, Ma Omar, as Progressive Voice is also a member of a lot of international alliances, such as Milk Tea Alliance and many more. So the Power Civil Society Organization could preserve or could maintain this voice that Ma Omar mentioned before, that the atrocity in Myanmar shall never be forgotten. So I actually also have Ma Omar, please.
Just a correction. Talking about the Myanmar military's long abuses and violations since 1962. Yes, 19, not 18. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your correction. 1962. Okay, thank you, Ma Omar. I also have a question for you, but we'll keep that at the end of the session. I am now looking at our current views. There has been a lot of viewers at the moment in YouTube. However, there hasn't been any other questions aside from the previous question, which has been answered by a colleague from Swaram in regards to the UPR in Malaysia. It has been answered for the 4th and the 5th of July. Confirming this back to Azura. Is it in the 4th and 5th of July?
Oh, sorry. I just opened the YouTube channel just now, so I'm hearing two voices. Yeah, sorry.
No
So
worries.
what are the questions?
Yeah, just confirming, although it has been answered in regards to the Malaysia UPR review adoption, it will be either
Yeah.
reviewed or adopted in July 4th and 5th.
Yeah, 4th and 5th July, yeah. But so far right now we don't have any feedbacks on what the government is going to say yes or no to all the recommendations given by each countries. But in terms of torture himself, we can see that in this year's cycle, there are more recommendations given by countries to compare with other cycles previously.
Okay. Thank you, Azura. Okay. Before actually going to you, Azura, I would like to first throw this microphone to Roberto. Since we haven't had any questions yet, but however, viewers, if you have any questions on the floor, please ask. We have all of our experts here to answer your questions. So in regards to IRCT, you mentioned about also IRCT crafted the Istanbul Protocol in terms of rehabilitation to victims of torture, as you might mention them and refer them to survivors of torture. I have this one genuine question. There has been this Istanbul Protocol, and you have the amount of documentation set to either prevent or to rehabilitate the victims of torture. But I'm curious, what sort of direct communication has IRCT given to states? For example, the cases that have been happening in Malaysia, in Myanmar, or Indonesia, for my country, for instance, within those documentations, what are the sort of direct communications that probably would have been done by IRCT to state actors? And what were the possible, what were the answers, or what were the maybe concerns or the main the responses from state actors? We might not infer to the maybe head of the state itself, but maybe from the Human Rights Commission or related institutions. Roberto?
Mhm. So from our side, from IRCT side, we work in strictly with our members when it comes to processes like the UPR or other submission, the CAT submission as well. But for the use, when it comes to the use, and it is mainly legal advocacy aiming at increasing the anti-torture framework in a given country, or pushing the country to ratify the establishment of a national preventive mechanism, and so forth. But when it comes to the use of Istanbul Protocol in exposing torture with international actors, our preferred privilege interlocutor is the UN Commissioner on Anti-Torture, the UNCAT. So we use our medical legal reports. We use the funding of our evaluation through the Istanbul, conducted through the Istanbul Protocol, to ask the court to denounce the systemic and systematic abuse by state actors. When there is a cut review of a given country, for instance, if we have a case, we have had several cases. We intervened 1 year ago in a joint submission for Algeria, when where a person was subjected to torture while in police custody. So we submitted an expert opinion alongside and together with with another NGO, stressing on the fact that the person didn't the evaluation of the person wasn't conducted according to the international standards set by the Istanbul Protocol. So asking the state and the first and foremost asking the CAT to ask the Algerian state to conduct a proper evaluation of the victim according to a protocol, and to assess the claims of the victim according to international law and international standards. So we have two joint modality of actions. We can we can move forward with the advocacy and supporting our members in asking and requesting states to ratify the convention, to establish the national protective preventive mechanism, to establish to force the police to stick to their duties and not to use brutality and violence against protesters, against people in detention, to ameliorate the detention condition of the inmates. But at the very same time, we also provide expert opinions on medical legal reports provided by state authorities.
And if I may know, are there any maybe, well, we probably know the last answer to that, but were there any some sort of positive positive responses from the government side itself when referring to this sort of mechanism that IRCT urges?
Well, the problem is that, I mean, we know how the states react to this kind of ask from international bodies, from international NGOs. So what regarding the case that I just mentioned, we facilitate the right to appeal for the victim for the revision of his claims at national level, but it's taking time. It's taking time, and there was no direct reply from the state. So it's already a success if the state accepts the fact that it's failing to comply with its international obligation and grant another avenue for reparation to the victim.
Yep. And you know what they say? There is a saying that quite disappointing, but not surprised. So that's what we usually, that's what we usually conclude whenever there are international recommendations. Same goes to the moment every international entities would urge or recommend to the government of Indonesia, they would also try to counter narrative those recommendations as well. So again, disappointing, but not surprised. Thank you, Roberto, for your response. Again, Azura, before going back to you, I will refer back going to Ma Omar first. Very sorry for giving you false hope before. Ma Omar, I'm very quite keen on the terminology to immune system to military junta, but I'm just quite curious if there might be any certain loopholes or possible weaknesses that we can see from the military junta at the moment of them probably breaking up, or maybe there are some sort of internal disruptions at the moment from military junta that we can maybe not sort, but we can elaborate on that more further maybe after in this webinar. But just being very much curious about this immune system. Is there anything that they might not be immune to?
Well, first of all, where things are now in Myanmar right now, the landscape is very new, very different than what you have come to know Myanmar before 2021. There was a 10-year time when the world actually saw Myanmar going through a democratic transition, for example. But right now, what we're seeing is that the Myanmar People's Revolution has advanced itself. And to the point that Myanmar military, that the People's Revolution has weakened the Myanmar military very drastically and very rapidly. The Myanmar military is losing every single day, really. Like they're losing their territories, they're losing their administrations, they are losing also their troops. Many of their troops are given up or surrendering to the People's Revolution, or yes, there is a huge casualties from the Myanmar military at this point. So what we're seeing is this Myanmar state, the infrastructures or the state structure that was built and dominated and abused by the Myanmar military has now become completely weakened. So meaning that this military is losing by all sides, yeah? So that is where we can think of the possibility of addressing this, how we actually end the military's impunity, or actually really stop this their immunity to the law and legal, which is going to be another step, because Myanmar is actually leading, heading towards forming, or you can say that Myanmar is heading towards rebuilding a new country, which is going to be very challenging for people to hear or understand it. But that is what the reality is. Because we have this multi-ethnic diversity, the ethnic and religious minorities, majorities. But right now, where things are at the moment is that this revolution is a mix between the arm and also the political defiance. So between that, the Myanmar military has no allies wherever they, wherever they go. People are against them. They know that. So we are seeing this military is sort of like about to fall or on the verge of falling. But the challenge that we will have to face in order to actually end this impunity. Of course, the impunity is really deeply entrenched within Myanmar society, because you can imagine of how many decades. It's like 3 generations by this military. Of course, the impunity is not only within the military or by the military. We see that impunity can be enjoyed by the other entities also. So how do we actually overcome that? Is going to come with this the People's Revolution planning to rebuild a new Myanmar in the federal democracy federal democracy governance structure, where there will be power sharing, equal power sharing among the ethnic communities and all. But then the main thing that I will say is that in this People's Revolution of building new Myanmar, the justice must be at the center. The human rights protection and protection of civilian must be at the center, which must be actually given priority and compliant by all actors, right? And then transitional justice is something our different civil society, different revolutionary groups have been focusing or developing a policy, for example, for the transition, to address the transitional justice. So I think there is a lot of hope with that to address this, but also at the same time, because it is an armed revolution. So when it comes to the arms, you always have this one area where you need to be able to bring this human rights, protection of human rights and civilian protection at the center by all actors. And how do we address that by the civil society or the political actors? I think that is where we are at the sort of like a crossroad in terms of addressing that. So I'm just crossing my fingers, Nadine, but so much hope, but also I will say a lot of challenges at the same time.
A lot of challenges indeed. And yes, when you mentioned the word allies, I'm also reminded that the fact that Myanmar is embargoed on its weapons through the resolution from the United Security Council back in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, when it was formed, the weapon embargo.
There is no such yet. That's the very reason we keep calling on the Security Council that they must adopt a new resolution under the Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, where they can actually first impose the comprehensive arms embargo that include aviation fuel and dual technology use, but as well as also the targeted sanctions against the military's businesses. And third is the accountability, where we call on the Security Council to adopt that resolution or just directly refer Myanmar situation to the ICC. And that's the only way to address this Myanmar military's long entrenched impunity and hold them to account by law. Yeah.
Thank you very much for clarifying this, Ma Omar. As international audience may listen this live, weapon as one of the key tools to preserve torture used by the military junta shall be embargoed. Although a lot of civil society organizations have been sounding this out to craft a comprehensive resolution from the United Nations Security Council itself, but more updated pushes are needed to this international entity. So that's what I might want to also urge viewers who are here live and who might also be here in the recorded session of this webinar. And we might want to go to the last part of the question and answer session because I haven't seen any more questions after this. Azura, finally, it's your turn. Um, just two key questions. The first, I am very, very much keen to hear about the adoption for the UPR, which will be held and we will monitor together on July 2024. But I would like to ask, that means that if this is going to be the fourth cycle, there was the third, the second, and the first period cycle. And I would like to ask if there are any repetitive recommendations which were asked by international entities from member states of the UN, and how were the responses and how was this recurring from the state members? For example, Indonesia, there has been tons of recommendations to ratify OPCAT and also the International Convention on Anti-Enforced Disappearances. However, the state continued to, they will try to ratify, but there has been no certain updates on that ever since in the surface or below. So I would like to ask regarding those stances from the government and how would you foresee in terms of ratification of CAT, how will the government respond? Will there be any slight bit of positive, if not negative, states on this, statements on this? Azura, please, you're grinning. I can sense your answer, but please, you may have the floor.
All right. Yeah. So I'll try to answer this as short as I can because I know this is the last question and people are waiting for this to finish. I'm just kidding. Okay. So as I said just now, right? So in the UPR, we can see that the recommendations given is more than the previous one, which is for the last recommendations we get 12 recommendations, and for the last one is 7, right? So in these 12 recommendations right now, right? I think when I look at it, when we do some comparison, we can see a lot of some similarities where we even put one sections and we can see the similarities, right? But the different, and if we look at the cycle 3 previously, in all the recommendations, whenever they state like to abolish something, they put it in a very long forms of abolish punishment, Sharia, convention, and all of that, will straight away the government will say no. But this time, most of the countries make it very clearly, take steps to prohibit forms of corporal punishment in schools, full stops, right? And most of it, when I can see a lot of like this, I think it's more strategical, because some may say that you don't want to abolish it because it's civil, Sharia, and schools where you combine it, right? So now when they put it in a separate things like this, I think I hope that actually if the government can say, like they can take in the middle grounds, right? But not say no straight away, because in the third cycle, the only one that they actually says yes, that they accept, is actually to do systematically independent investigations in prisons, which is not like abolish or having a new thing, right? They just have to conduct some new investigation process, which I think is a play safe for them, right? So if they want to abolish or change something, I think so far they said no to everything, and they only say they also accept another thing, which is to strengthen national legislation. So that is why we are thinking of having like, okay, fine, you don't want to do UNCAT, let's do anti-torture bill, right? And anti-torture bill only focus on civil, doesn't focus on Sharia or anything. So how do we see this, right? So these are the strategies that we are looking at first on how do we try to push the government itself. But I think so far, if I look at the recommendations given by the countries, I can see a lot of difference on the words, and we'll see. Yeah.
To make it creative. However, the response will be very much normative,
Yeah.
as it has been through the past 3 cycles.
Yep.
Wow, I can be pretty much hopeful But let's see, Azura, please share with us where you would like to publicize this. There might be releases and such from
Yeah.
Swaram, and
Yeah.
yes, where would you
Will
like
do,
to
will do.
publicize it, and where should we view this together?
I think Soram would post it in our Facebook, mostly in our Facebook and Instagrams. Yeah, I will see.
Facebook, and we
Hopefully,
will view
at
it.
least some
Hopefully.
changes. So, corporal punishments in school, I think that's the easiest, no? Let's see.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Wow. There has been there supposedly I would love to. I still have a lot of questions in my head for all of our speakers at the moment, for Maoma, for Roberto, and also for Azura. But as time constraints, and I would love to keep the momentum for our viewers to still be here. Let's continue this in another set of webinar viewers and also speakers. So I would love to thank all of the viewers here today. I see a constant number of viewers here. Hopefully they are the same viewers who are viewing this from the start till the end. And I would also love to give my biggest appreciation to all of the speakers here, Ma Omar, Azura, and also Roberto. There will be a lot of international mechanisms going on. For example, Indonesia just had our ICTPR review. Swaram here stated that Malaysia will have their UPR adoption in July. We will be welcoming a lot more of this international mechanisms from countries across Asia, Asia Pacific. And let's view together on how torture will be consistently prevail, or will it be crumbled down within a short or long amount of time. But let's see. But by that, let's solidify our solidarity together as Azura crosses, no, not crosses, held her hand up high like this. And let's see what we can do, civil side organizations and also other civil society components, to strike this down. I'm Nadine Sherani, moderating to today's webinar, as well as the A3T Secretariat. Thank you very much for viewing this, and see you in the next webinar. Thank you.
To everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.